Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, and this is part two of my discussion with Abayomi. And now we return, and now we return to our All Africa edition. We return to our series on Africa, and we are going to be talking about the country of Chad. First off, Abayomi, before I ask my first question, so Chad, is it considered North Africa or is it considered Central Africa?
It does border Libya, which is considered North Africa. It's considered Central Africa because it borders several countries in Central Africa, as well as West Africa, because it borders Cameroon, as well as the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So it's a country that sits Central West Africa and
Okay.
North Africa, North, Central, and West Africa. So when the imperialists drew these lines, they were done on the basis of their interests and not on the interest and historical trajectory of the African people. And Chad now has about 21 million residents, but at the same time, their history goes back a long, long period of time. In fact,
Well,
there
uh,
have been,
well,
yeah.
that's a perfect segue to this question. Then, so what was Chad like before French colonialism? How did it become a colony of France, and what were the socio-economic conditions of the people like when under French colonial rule?
Well, prior to the advent of colonialism in Chad, the area now known as Chad, the country has a long history. Uh, from an archaeological standpoint, there's a archaeologist, a paleontologist who is French, who has attempted to prove that they have fossils there that are older than the fossils that have been found in East Africa, principally in Kenya and Ethiopia. He claims that he discovered, along with his colleagues, fossils or pre-hominids, which go back some 7 million years. Others were found which go back 3.7 million years. Now, there's been debate over whether or not these fossils represented elements within human evolution, which were more in line with chimpanzees or other primates. So it's still open for debate. The whole theory, when I was in undergraduate school in the mid 1970s, they were saying that the theory was that man and ape had similar ancestors. Okay,
Yeah.
that was pretty much the theory, and this paleontologist tried to prove, Michael Brunet, that is his name, that actually there were people in Chad going back some 7 million years, which were not primates and which were hominids and other forms of species which eventually evolved into Homo erectus or Homo sapien
Yeah.
or Homo sapien sapien. And the fossils that were found were called Sahelanthropus, which is, they claim is an extinct genus of hominins. And this was during the Miocene period in world history. So they're trying to say this is prehistory. Now, the whole concept of prehistory, I have a problem with anyway. Uh, as long as you have human beings on Earth, they're going to be making historical progress or historical regression. To say it's prehistory, I mean, what does that really mean in reality? So, Tumé was the name given to these fossils that were found, skulls, and later they found other body parts which were fossils. Tumé is related to one of the ancient terminologies that came later, meaning king or the head of a more or less feudal society. So it's very, very interesting, these debates that have been going on. And yes, but they have evidence that, there were people there, whether they were hominids or, people who were Homo erectus, who walked upright. So this debate is still going on inside the academic and particularly archaeological and paleontological uh, fields. Now, after that, of course, it is said that the area of Chad was part and parcel of other broader areas. For example, the Sahara, which thousands of years ago uh, was not dry, was not a desert, but was lush, vegetated areas. And of course, due to climate change over a period of time, the areas, of course, dried out. But theory suggests that the languages came from the Afro-Asiatic language groups, the Nilo-Saharan language groups, and the Niger-Congo language groups. And they claim that these language groups originated during the pre-historical period. So these are some of the debates that are going on. But a series of civilizations that started in the first millennium, talking about 2,000 years ago, came about in the area. And they're saying now that these civilizations were developed by indigenous Africans. Previous to that, some people were suggesting that they were migrants from Arabic-speaking regions of West Asia. But those theories now have been debunked. And there was a lot of trade that went on during that particular time period. One of the most well-known civilizations was the Kanem-Bornu civilization, which existed. They were combined at certain points, and in other points, they were separate. But these civilizations were involved in trade, in salt, in textiles, and other commodities. Also, camels were very, very important in regard to tools for trans-Saharan trade. So yes, this is some aspects of the early history of Chad between the first millennium up until about 1900, or the late 19th century, I should say, with the intervention of French imperialism in that area. They came in, there was huge resistance against France, but eventually they prevailed, and they were able to colonize the Chad area and turn it into a vassal region in support of French imperialism. So the colonization process formally began during the late 19th century. Around 1902, they became a part of the broader French empire in Africa. And at the same time, though, there was resistance all during this particular time period, going all the way up to World War II, when there was a reconfiguration of French colonial rule in Africa. We talked about this months ago.
In fact,
Yeah.
before we get into that, because
Okay.
that's segueing into how Chad became independent. What were the
Right.
conditions of the people of Chad under French colonial rule? Once again, the very minimal research I did through Google AI and ChatGPT. Once again, French colonial rule. I don't know where France where the scrutiny of how awful the French empires. I mean, France is a very lucky country in that respect. Maybe it's because England and America are so obnoxious about. But anywho, from what I read, again, French colonial rule was grotesque. But do give us more information.
Yeah, it was, and people were heavily exploited and oppressed, and this went on 60 or 70 years, up until 1960, when they became independent. But yes, it was a very bad system. The French invaded and conquered around 1891. There was the Battle of Kusan, where Rabi Zabar fought to try to stave off French colonialism. By 1905, they became a part of French Equatorial Africa. So the French themselves ruled in a vast manner. But then when these countries became independent, they were carved up into smaller countries, which had very limited capacity for development. And it actually brought about divisions and later wars that took place, particularly between the South and the northern parts of Chad.
So, how did Chad become independent? Was it one of violent struggle or one of peaceful transfer of power?
Well, what happened was that during World War II, Felix Iboué, who was a French colonial figure, he was African, but he was a part of the French colonial system, um, became a prominent figure during that particular time period. Now, after the war, there were political parties that were formed inside the country. One leading party, the Chadian Progressive Party, the PPT,
Yeah.
was considered more radical, and they were formed in 1947. And the more conservative party, the Chadian Democratic Union, was formed later, and although it was in the same year, and they represented two different regional constituencies. The PPT uh, largely grew out of the southern part of Chad, and the UDT out of the north. And this is very, very important because there will be conflicts as the independence process continued, which brought about civil war and other forms of displacement in Chad.
Then that's a perfect segue then to this question, which is how do you assess the legacy in terms of socioeconomics and social mobility of Francois Tom Balibaye, who served, and apologies if I'm butchering all their names, who served office from the 11th of August 1960 to the 13th of April 1975. He was tied closely with the military, but was part of, as you mentioned, the political party, the Chadian Progressive Party, which on paper advocated African nationalism, Pan-Africanism, anti-imperialism, African socialism, anti-colonialism, and they were very left-wing on paper and they were also members of the continent-wide African Democratic Rally, which was a broad left coalition of African left-wing parties colonized by France, working together to advance a left-wing anti-colonial agenda. So I'm curious your response on the legacy of President Francois.
Yeah, as you said, that party, the Progressive Party, on paper was much more radical and left wing, but the criticisms of it is that was largely based in the South. The people who were there were largely people from the southern groups of Chad, and other groups claim they were suppressed during the period between 1960 and 1975. And also there was the development of another group called the National Liberation Front of Chad, which later was allied with the Muammar Gaddafi government in Libya. But yes, the divisions in the country, which were imposed during French colonialism, had a lot to do with the character of the independent government in Chad. So there was factional struggles that took place, and it hampered the capacity of the country to genuinely develop between 1960 and 1975.
Then how do you assess the socioeconomic legacy of Noel Milaru Odingar, a military dictator who was in office for 2 years, followed by Felix Malum of the military? He was in office from 1975 to 1979. How do you assess both of their legacies?
Well, they were responding to the political crisis inside the country. But despite the fact that they took over and dominated the administrative apparatus of the country for several years, it did not resolve the internal conflicts that existed regionally and was not able to overcome the developmental problems that had been imposed by French colonialism. The lack of development, the divisions on a regional basis, and of course, Chad remains one of the most oppressed and impoverished countries in the world, and even in Africa, despite the fact that they do have resources. They have oil, they have gold, they have diamonds, they have tin, they have bauxite, but due to the divisions inside the country and the lack of the capacity of the political elites that have dominated the country over the last 65 or 66 years, the conflict, the conflict and the contradictions have not been able to be overcome.
Then how do you assess the legacy of Gokuni Odwe? Apologies again if I'm butchering his name. How do you assess the 37 days he was in office? He was part of a Marxist-Leninist party that advocated for Islamic socialism, direct democracy, nationalism, progressivism, anti-Zionism, and apparently they had even a Maoist faction. Apparently, so how do you assess the very short time this guy was in office? Yeah, curious response.
Well, obviously, they were not able to consolidate their power. You also had the lingering presence and economic domination of France. So the French military forces were called in periodically when there was instability inside the countries. And of course, his government did not last very long.
So and then followed by him, we have Mamat Chua. He was in office the April 29th, 1979 to September 1979. And he was part of he was he was part of the popular movement for the liberation of Chad. What can you tell us about well, what's your assessment of his legacy, if there's even any legacy to speak of?
Yeah, just a few months. They were not able to consolidate their power, not able to overcome the divisions that have been inherited from colonialism, and also the regional conflicts between the South and the North. So no, they were not able to consolidate their authority inside Chad.
A member of that same a member of that same party, Popular Movement for the Liberation of Chad, is Gokuni Odwe. He gets into office September 3rd, 1979, until June 7, 1982. However, he was ousted in a coup. How do you assess his time in office, his legacy, if there's any to speak of?
Similar problems in poverty, the lack of unity, factional divisions based on a regional level, and the military domination of the administrative apparatus of the country would not allow them to consolidate their forces inside the country.
And after Gokuni's ouster begins the reign of Hassan Habre, or Hassani Habre, 7th of June 1982 to December the 2nd, 1990. 8 years in office until he's ousted in a coup himself. So 8 years he was part of the FAN, the Armed Forces of the North, or the UNIR, and the National Union for Independence and Revolution. Now, from what I've read of the movement he was part of, it's openly far right. It's socially very regressive. And then when it comes to socioeconomics, very pro free market nonsense, and an important emphasis that they were very anti-communist and anti-Gaddafi. So that being said, I'm curious your response when you look at his legacy from a critical leftist perspective.
Well, Hussein Habre uh, had a notorious reputation for brutality and repression inside of Chad. And as you mentioned, during a civil war during the early 1980s, Libya intervened in Chad in support of Folanat. And they were, of course, fighting against the French-backed forces that were largely based in the north. So here again, the same factional and regional conflicts are preventing national unity inside of Chad. And Libya had sent troops into Chad to try to defeat the Hissène Habré faction of the government. And that went on for many, many years. Libya was condemned during this particular time period. Developments in Chad led to a big split inside the Organization of African Unity, along with the whole question of the Western Sahara. So between 1982, 1983, there was a huge dysfunctional problem inside the Organization of African Unity.
Interesting. And then from the 28th of February, 1991 to April 20th, 2021, until he was killed in action, Chad was under the rule of Idris Deby. He's essentially a frontman for the Chad military and is associated with the political party Patriotic Salvation Movement. And while they are on paper secular and at times they can be left leaning. Safe to assume they've mostly governed like neo colonizers and right wingers.
Yes, they were very close to France, and as a result of that, there wasn't a lot that they could actually do. And French imperialism during this particular time period, we're talking about the period between, let's say, the late 20 teens up until the early 2020s, there was the intervention of France militarily in the area, but also there was the issue of the French Foreign Legion transforming itself into the G5, as well as Operation Berkane, which Chad was involved in. These were five different African states that had partnered with France ostensibly to stop the rebel incursions into not only Chad, but other areas throughout West Africa. Mali was one of them, and also some of the other Sahel states, more in West Africa. The AFRICOM, United States Africa Command, which was formed in 2008, was also in evidence in Chad, along with Mali and other countries in West Africa. But it wasn't. But after a few years, it became obvious that France and the United States were either working with these rebel groups to justify their continued presence in that region of Africa, or they were completely ineffective in defeating these rebel groups. The former idea now has gained widespread traction that the US and France are actually funding these counter-revolutionary rebel groups in order to make sure that these countries do not consolidate, they do not unite, and that they, of course, keep Russia and China at bay. And so the French and the United States can continue to dominate Chad and other countries in the Sahel region. But that has been challenged in the last several years when the French troops were expelled from Mali and then eventually from Burkina Faso and Niger. And of course, the Americans as well have been asked to leave. Now, they've been coming back, wanting to hold discussions and negotiations over security. But I'm very skeptical that they can do anything to help stabilize the countries in the Sahel region.
And we come now to the current leadership of Mahatmat Deby, who was part of the same military and political faction as his predecessor. How do you assess his time in office? Yeah, how do you assess his time in office so far?
Well, he was the son of Idris Deby, Itno, and actually, according to the Chadian constitution that had been developed over a period of years, he was not supposed to inherit the administration of the Chadian state. There was a political process through the parliament for succession. But in essence, he was designated as the head of state. So many people categorize that transitional process as a coup d'etat, not in a conventional sense, but from the standpoint that they suppressed the constitutional guidelines for political transition. And he has been in office now for approximately 5 years. His father was killed, they said, in a battle with rebels in the southern part of Chad. So he took over. And since that time period, they have said that they want to expel French military forces. I don't know whether they have or not, but that is a very positive development. Nonetheless, the economic situation inside the country still remains highly underdeveloped.
And when it comes to the foreign policy of Chad, during the Cold War, was Chad a non-aligned member, but leaned more towards the Soviets, Eastern European Communist Bloc, Cuba, China, Vietnam, or did they mostly align itself with France, the U.S., Canada, and its pan-European allies in NATO and the EU?
Yeah, it depends on who was in office. And I would say by and large, they were allied with the West, the Western imperialist system. Now, during the period of the 1980s, there was an effort to ally themselves with Libya, which was left-leaning, but at the same time, they were independent of the Soviet Union at the time, as well as China. And this may have had an impact on the outcome of what happened in 2011, because Gaddafi, because they had tremendous resources in terms of oil and natural gas, a relatively small population, and it was a state-controlled society, the Jamahiriya. Most of the money either went back to the people or went into the national treasury. So at the time of the counter-revolution in 2011, Libya had owed essentially no money to the IMF and the World Bank. They had estimated $170 billion in a sovereign wealth fund. So they were the most prosperous state on the African continent. And that's why they were targeted for destruction, because they were independent and because they had so much wealth. But that whole process of overthrowing the government in Libya failed from the standpoint that they have not been able to put together a unitary state over the last 15 years. So Chad has been impacted by this because Libya is a very unstable country right now. You have essentially three different centers of power in the east. You have one center of power where Mr. Haftar, Khalifa Haftar, who in fact defected from the Libyan military in the early mid 1980s.
Yeah.
During the war in Chad. He was sent there to direct military operations in Chad, and he resigned from the Gaddafi government and was given asylum in the United States, in Virginia, and became an operative of the Central Intelligence Agency. He was sent back after decades. In 2011, he was sent back to Libya, ostensibly to take charge of the counter-revolution and be the head of state, but he has not been able to consolidate his power throughout Libya. But he does have a dominant position in the eastern part of the country, the area known as Cyrenaica, under the Ottomans and other outside forces that had dominated Libya for centuries.
It is so funny how all of these people who are groomed for these well-funded jobs as being, Western imperialist proxies. It's incredible how none of them are ever, once the enemy is ousted, none of them are ever able to quote unquote stabilize the country and whatnot and gain a
No.
popular following.
Well, I mean, we were talking about Iran earlier, and the monarchy there, they want to put it back in power, the Pahlavi family. But in the last few days, the administration has been saying that maybe they're not the best people to put in power. They will be in deep trouble if they showed up in Tehran right now. The Pahlavi family claiming that they're the effective rulers of the Islamic Republic of Iran. They are a monarchy, and it is completely supported by the United States and the state of Israel. When Trump came to Detroit back in January to speak before the Detroit Economic Club, there were literally thousands of people standing outside demonstrating. And a part of that crowd, towards the edge of it, were about 50 people who claimed to be Iranian nationals who were holding posters of the Shah, son, Pahlavi.
Yeah.
And within these posters, they had the symbol of the state of Israel in it. So this is outrageous. How can you be calling for the state of Israel and U.S. imperialism to overthrow the Islamic Republic of Iran and at the same time to reimpose a monarchy inside of Iran. So it's absolutely amazing. But Chad, of course, they're going to keep their eyes on Chad. It has oil, it has these other important strategic resources, but it seems to be some type of anti-French sentiment that has also impacted Chad along with the other countries in the Sahel.
So I'd have to ask. So I have to ask this question, which is, what is Chad's relations with BRICS? And then the follow up question: what's been Chad's response to the anti-African? No, the African anti-French Spring that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I don't know of any relations between Chad and BRICS, considering the underdeveloped character of the Chadian economy. I'm not sure they would be eligible or even interested in trying to align themselves with BRICS. Perhaps they would be, but I don't have any information in that regard. But in terms of the anti-French rebellion that has been taking place in the Sahel states, they have been impacted by it because they have asked the French military to leave Chad. So we'll see how that pans out in the next few months.
And then well, actually, this is going to be actually second last question, and then I have a follow up question because when it comes to the Chad civil war. So, does Chad have a strong left wing movement and left wing alternative opposition in politics to the ruling junta and its proxies? And with that, any final thoughts you want to share about Chad and explain to us how whatever grievances and injustices and betrayals that existed in previous Chad governments when the far left, was in power, that the only way to really address the grotesque destitution a majority of people in Chad live under, this, Chad does have to embrace socialism, Marxism, Pan-Africanist leftism, and if they want to even borrow and be influenced by what Gaddafi had, what the Syrian Arab Republic once was, the sort of Middle Easternist, West Asian leftism, that's the only way forward to advance decent livelihoods and the well-being of the vast majority of the working class slash working poor in Chad. Very curious your response.
Yes, I'm not aware of any prominent or organized left movement in Chad at this point. During the 1980s, they had the National Liberation Front of Chad, and of course the groups in the South that had allied themselves with the Jihadiyya in Libya could have been considered progressive, but overall they did not prevail. And that is the tragedy of Chad and the entire Sahel region of West Africa. Right now, you have military governments in neighboring states, in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, that are working to build some type of independent existence, but they still have tremendous security issues. They still have these rebel groups that are fighting against the central government, and they're still being undermined by the United States and France. So yes, in terms of the anti-French sentiment, it is there. But in terms of consolidating some type of left-wing party or left-wing movement that could really make a difference in Chad, that has not developed as of yet.
And we didn't really talk about the Chad Civil War, or well, we sort of alluded to it. What do you want our audiences to understand about the Chad Civil War? What was it all about? Was there any way that this could have been prevented? Was there any way that the international community, and when I say that, I'm I'm talking about the collective West. Was there anything that the West could have done to play a positive role in trying to make peace, amongst the people of Chad, and not have them go through this grotesque civil war that they went through? And and of course, you already mentioned the Libya connection. I believe Gaddafi, although Gaddafi, I think he was definitely in the wrong when it came to the civil war in Sierra Leone and supporting the rebel
RUF.
tactics there. But when it comes to Chad, I believe he played a much more positive role, and that basically the civil war in Chad was actually just a proxy war against Gaddafi, which the West, of course, hated his Pan Africanism and hated his leftism. So, very curious your response on that.
Yeah, it was clearly a war between Libya and the pro-French forces in Chad and the French government itself, because they actually sent in troops when the government in the north was threatened by the rebels in the south who were allied with Libya. And Libya also sent in troops as well. And it was during that whole process that you had the defection of Khalifa Haftar and his exile inside the United States. So yes, they made the situation worse. The way the country was constructed during the whole independence process, it divided the peoples of the South with the peoples of the North. And of course, as a result of that, it just led to instability and also civil war. The war still has not been completely resolved. There's still rebel groups that are fighting against the central government in N'Djamena. So this is going to have to work itself out in the long term.
Is there a possibility? First off, what's the majority language that people speak in Chad? Out of curiosity.
French is considered a national language of the country, so I'm certain that the majority of the people inside of Chad speak French, but also they speak their traditional languages as well. Some of them are connected with the groups around Lake Chad, also in Nigeria, Kanem, Bornu would possibly be Hausa speaking in Chad. But yes, French is pretty much the national lingua franca for their country.
So, like many African countries, it's yeah, safe to say, fairly complex country. Even Sudan itself, before it split, and even with the new, I mean, with the current state of North Sudan and even the current state of South Sudan, still hasn't been able to, reconcile themselves. So Chad is quite a complex country.
Yeah, just like Sudan. I mean, you got conflicts in the Republic of Sudan, which is in the north. Now there's a split within the military apparatus between the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces. That is still going on. There's no real resolution in sight in that regard. And you also have the intervention on both sides of the United Arab Emirates, which is supporting the RSF, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is supporting the central government of Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. And interestingly enough, when the war broke out, the resumption of the war between Israel and the United States against Iran,
Yeah.
and when Iran retaliated and started hitting facilities in the so-called Gulf Cooperation Council, or the Persian Gulf Arab monarchies, which I like to call them, al-Burhan, pledged his solidarity with Saudi Arabia. So, and not with Iran. Now that goes back many years. They used to be very close to Iran when the previous leader was in power, but they shifted. They shifted to support the Gulf Cooperation Council during the war in Yemen. When that didn't go well, the leader al-Bashir, who's now, I understand, is still in detention,
Yeah.
after nearly 7 years, shifted and wanted to abandon the Gulf Cooperation Council. They recognized the Syrian Arab Republic, and they also wanted to reestablish relations with the Russian Federation and Iran. But of course, he was taken out. And since that time period, they've not been able to stabilize the country at all. But Chad seems to be more stable, particularly around the capital and other areas. But there's still problems, security problems that the government is facing.
Well, boy, to us, to, boy, to us in the anti-imperialist movement and in the Africa Solidarity movement, boy, do we have our work cut out for us.
We do, but we have to study all these different divisions and conflicts, civil wars, coup d'etats, and so forth to get an insight of the challenges that we're going to be facing as time moves forward.
Well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1 with Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Report. Join us next week where we are going to explore the country where the Cold War got really hot. Can't wait to research and listen to Abayomi's historical assessment of this country, and that is Angola. So join us then for that. And, have to mention this. Jesse Jackson, as everyone knew, passed away last month during Black History Month, and Jesse isn't the only complex Black civil rights leader who passed away recently. Another one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s closest confidants, Bernard Lafayette, who was part of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he was also a Quaker, the American Friends Service Committee. He passed away, so we've lost him. We've lost Jesse Jackson. We've lost Henry Belafonte 2 or 3 years ago. Bernard, Lafayette, I don't know too much about him, but I know that he was starting to help MLK Jr.'s Poor People's Campaign. There's a great part in the HBO series King in the Wilderness, King in the Wilderness Years, or something like that, where Bernard was talking about starting the Poor People's Campaign, and then Bernard would say, are we going to include Puerto Ricans in this? Are we going to include Latin Americans in there? Are we going to include Mexican Americans? MLK Jr. says to him, are they poor? Yes. Well, they're joining it. What about the poor whites? Well, of course they're joining it. What about the Native Americans? Are they poor? Yes, they are joining. So,
yes, I met Bernard Lafayette. He was a guest, special guest of ours for the annual Martin Luther King celebrations in Detroit in 2018. So we had a chance to spend time with him. He remained committed to nonviolent civil disobedience seems like as a principle. I didn't agree with him on that, but he was very close to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he should be noted for that as well. And also Jesse Jackson was quite interesting because I first I heard about him in the media a lot, but the first time I saw him was in the spring of 1970 at New Bethel Baptist Church, which was pastored by the Reverend C.L. Franklin, who was the father of Aretha Franklin. Now, he was very close with Jesse Jackson. Aretha Franklin, in her autobiography, says that her father was very instrumental in promoting him as a public speaker and even as a minister. He said he allowed Jesse Jackson to speak and preach at New Bethel even before he was ordained. I'm not sure if C.L. Franklin was involved in the ordainment process of Jesse Jackson, but just to mention that, Jesse Jackson had a lot of contradictions, but he did raise some good issues. Like, for example, in 1979, when Andrew Young was fired by Jimmy Carter as the United Nations ambassador for the U.S. because he met with a representative of the UN mission for the Palestinian Liberation Organization.
Yes.
And when that became public, he was fired. Now, he had said a lot of controversial things prior to that. He had made a statement in 1978 that there were thousands of political prisoners in the United States. This is what Andrew Young said. He didn't get fired then, but a year later, when he met with the PLO at the UN mission, he was fired. But I think that was a turning point in the established civil rights organizations because Jesse Jackson traveled to the region. He went to the West Bank, and he went to some other areas in West Asia, and the position started to shift at that time, in terms of the unconditional support for the state of Israel, based on uh, all kinds of false notions of the chosen people, or that they were victims of the Holocaust, so they should have their own state. That began to shift. And even I remember Ben Hooks, Coretta Scott King, and some others held a press conference in Washington, D.C. during that particular time period to protest the expulsion of Andrew Young as the UN ambassador. And it was because of in my opinion, the problems that Jimmy Carter had, because a lot of people supported Jimmy. He was running in 1976. They were tired of the Republicans. Nixon had been driven out. Gerald Ford was there, but he was not really that responsive or effective in terms of addressing the concerns of the African American community. And as a result of that, things started to shift politically. So, so now, Jesse Jackson, and also on the question of apartheid in South Africa, he raised that when he ran for president for the first time in 1983, 1984. So the South Africans had a lot of respect for him because he was a high profile figure.
Well,
And he was speaking against apartheid and so forth. So Cyril Ramaphosa, who's the president of the Republic of South Africa, he heads the Government of National Unity, traveled all the way here to Chicago and spoke a week ago at Jesse Jackson's private memorial, which was held the day after the funeral. And I thought he gave the best speech of all for the 2 days of memorializing Jackson. He talked about how Jesse Jackson was an African, how he, had promoted, the end of apartheid. And even after 1994, when Mandela took over, he continued to travel to South Africa. And so they commended him for that. Also, who traveled, I don't know if you saw this, President Felix Tshisekedi also traveled to Chicago and also spoke at Jesse Jackson's memorial, the private memorial. Yeah, they're both on YouTube. You can see both the speeches on YouTube.
I wasn't. Well, while I still have you on, I wanted. What's your historical assessment of Jesse Jackson? And I ask you this because I used to be of the opinion, and now I know your family at Black Agenda Reports has an endless amount of criticisms to make towards Jesse Jackson and to Andy Young and to
right.
and to Bernard Lafayette. I know for a fact I can hear Glenn Ford over here and Bruce Dixon over there saying Jesse's a Black misleadership class member and so forth. But I was pleasantly surprised when doing some research into why this Democrat lost here, George McGovern, Michael Dukakis, Walter Mondale before that. And it was very interesting to research Jesse Jackson's two insurgent campaigns. He basically was Bernie Sanders and Ralph Nader before Ralph's independent presidential bid and Bernie's efforts to try to become the Democratic nominee. And I thought Jesse Jackson's campaign was incredible. I think he reached out to the West Asian community. He reached out to poor Koreans, Japanese Americans, Chinese
Palestinians, Arab
Americans,
Americans,
Native Americans. He was engaging with the queer community way before it became popular, and he went to visit the victims of what was that serial Jeffrey Dahmer, the infamous serial killer.
From Milwaukee, yes.
Yeah, who targeted Black queer people, Latinx queer people, and people of color.
Killed them and cannibalized it, yeah.
Jesse Jackson actually went all the way to Michigan to protest against the police's mishandling and actually went to, members of the community. And I just thought it was incredible that he was against the drug war before it became popular. And he got, I think he got I think he got third place when he first ran, trying to get the nomination, which the Democrats unfortunately gave it to Walter Mondale. And then when it was Michael Dukakis, he got second place and so forth. So I say all of this because in popular Black left spaces, if you read Black Agenda Report, you look at Black liberation media, even Black Power media, most of the time, if the name Jesse Jackson comes up, there's going to be an avalanche of criticisms. But I think I just think but I think we should give Jesse a little bit more credit where credit's due. He did become very much a total Democrat lackey, a total loyalist to the Democrats who were only becoming more and more right wing since since the rise of Clinton's. But I think his two efforts to try to get the Democratic nomination, I actually think are much more inspiring than it's given credit for. And he's a very, very interesting historical figure. So I tend to take a much more objective view that once upon a time he was this great flaming leftist and then became, whatever you want to call him, blackness leadership class member or too loyal to the Democrats. But that should be in the historical record. So I'm very curious. So what's your?
Yeah, I agree with your position on his two runs, 1984 and 1988. I thought were appropriate at that time period. The counterintelligence program, the economic crisis that was impacting the African American community had crushed the capacity of any type of collective resistance. And I think his campaign united a lot of people within the African American community and beyond the African American community. Raised the question of Palestine. He even went to Syria to negotiate for the release of a U.S. pilot who had been shot down in Lebanon by the Syrian Arab Army. So these were major developments during the 1980s. And even before that, he was involved in boycotts in Chicago and other areas against corporations that would not hire African Americans. I think he did contribute tremendously to the overall struggle of African Americans. He came out of the civil rights movement, the student movement. Then he joined the SCLC and was there actually when Martin Luther King was assassinated. So I think that he should be given credit, for the contributions that he made to the struggle of African American people. And I don't think he was a Marxist by no means, but at the same time, he did make his contributions, and I think we need to give him credit for that. A lot of his critics can't mobilize hardly anybody and have very little presence. So from that standpoint, I think it was positive. But the speech of President Cyril Ramaphosa, I thought, was the best out of all the speeches that were given over the 2 days of the memorial for Jesse Jackson.
But this is where I find quite. I mean, this is where I find quite fascinating is that Jesse Jackson, I think this is going to be hard for people to understand this because Bernie Sanders, his campaign, really shook the whole world. I think even people who were supportive of Bernie Sanders were shocked at how far he got and how much the Democrats had to cheat in order to, win against him.
Block him, yeah.
But so for me, it's weird to see how Jesse Jackson he was considered like a real rebel of the Democrats, and it was shocking how a lot of Black Congress people did not support his bid. Again, a lot of unions did not support his bid. Lots of people who you would have thought would have supported Jesse Jackson did not support his bid. So it's quite astounding that he got as far as he got, which I think is quite interesting. And then to make it even worse, I remember asking my friend Chris Richards, I was saying to him, why couldn't Michael Dukakis? Why couldn't Walter Mondale? Why often in debates were they so stumped when pushing back against Reagan and Bush and so forth. Why didn't Michael Dukakis take have the courage of his convictions? Yes, I'm a proud member of the ACLU. When Bush was trying to attack him as like a flaming leftist, bleeding
Mhm.
heart liberal and so forth like that.
Right,
And Chris said the following. Chris said the following. Well, think about it. The Democrats had to stop Jesse Jackson from
right.
advancing. They had to throw everything in their power to make sure Jesse didn't get the nomination. You don't do that to an insurgent left wing candidacy. You can't go back and say I'm proud of the furlough prison program. You can't say that you're a proud member of the ACLU. You can't even attack the Republicans from the left if you've just spent all this time destroying Jesse Jackson's bid. So I'm very
Yeah,
curious your response to
that's
that.
a problem, I have with some so-called black leftists that they're good at criticizing, but they don't really have any program to advance, the black struggle inside the United States. So this is a major problem. I mean, if you look at the fact that Jimmy Carter was a one-term president, had a lot to do with his failure to address the issues of African Americans, and also the fact that Andrew Young was fired from his administration, and this brought out a lot of animosity, even among the so-called mainstream civil rights leadership. So I think the black vote is still very important, and that's why it's courted. But if it's not courted properly, then it could result in disaster. And we saw that in 2024, in 1980, when Ronald Reagan took office, and the fact that he was reelected again in 1984, and then in 1988, when George Bush Sr. Won the presidency. He only served for one term because of the LA Rebellion, the Rodney King Rebellion, the decline of the US economy during the early 1990s, and also the campaign of Ross Perot. There was a split in the right itself, which opened up for Bill Clinton to take office. I don't think he would have won if the Republicans had been united. Perhaps he would have, perhaps not.
So that being said, do you think Jesse Jackson, and again, one can criticize the Jesse Jackson of the of the late 1990s, 2000s, and onwards, but again, I mean, like, okay, was he always perfect? No. Was he always the most articulate? No. But was he the one that actually energized the left? And again, I think it says more about whatever you want to call the left, the union movement, and so forth, and even our black leadership. It says a lot how Jesse Jackson was so popular amongst the people that he got third place when he first tried to get the nomination from the Democrats, second place when he tried to do it again. And again, it says a lot about left leadership that a lot of these people, these organizations, did not support Jesse Jackson. Same with same with Bernie Sanders. Everybody always says to the Joe Steins of the world, the Ralph Naders of the world, and so forth, come join the Democrats and so forth. But then when you have a Dennis Kucinich or a Mike Gravel or even a Bernie Sanders, I mean, Bernie got as far as he got in spite of not many unions and so forth supporting him, and certainly not corporate newspapers and so forth, and apart from a magazine like the Nation magazine and TYT supporting him. So so what was so I'm curious your response to that when we talk when we critically look at Jesse when we critically look at Jesse Jackson's two bids to get the Democratic nomination.
Yeah, I think that he did make a contribution. And even when he was in Chicago, back during the late 60s and early 70s, when there was a lot of political ferment going on in Chicago, he was at the center of a lot of it in terms of the boycotts against corporations that would not hire African Americans. He was there, had Watt Stacks in 1972 in Los Angeles, that huge event, shouting "It's Nation Time," all that. So yeah, he was very, very clever in terms of intervening at certain periods of time that gave him a lot of exposure, but at the same time created a lot of controversy.
Interesting. Well, we're gonna have to end the program here, and yes, and I just want to say, again, there's much to I'm sure there's much to criticize about the late Bernard Lafayette, and there is much to criticize about Jackson. But I do have to just humbly say, rest in peace to both. We should thank them for the good that they did, and I hope to do a show in the future again, looking at Jesse, Bernard, Henry Belafonte, and for that, I have to apologize to the viewers because wasn't able to do much programming during Black History Month because was sick with multiple health issues and personal issues. But anywho, on that note, folks, good night and good luck. We will see you next week. We continue our Africa series on Angola. All my best until then. Abayomi, you have a very great weekend ahead of you.
You too.